Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what I refer to as the legitimacy wars. The legitimacy wars. This is where the globalists are working very hard, by the way, and with much industry and application to delegitimize every facet and component of Western civilization, to delegitimize it on a mass scale. So everything is to be delegitimized for the sole purpose of removing opposition or questioning of the globalist project. Now remember, the globalist project is ideological. It's not based in reality or based in anything organic. It is an ideological project that's being imposed on the Western citizens by force and by mass coercion and by underhanded means and trickery, treachery, and so on. So I would argue it is the globalist project that's illegitimate. But to them, the war on legitimacy is that if we can delegitimize everything else and we're the only show left in town, then we must be by extension, therefore, legitimate, 100% legitimate. And they'll engage in any means of doing that. For example, if Donald Trump wins an election, it's because the Russians did it. It's not legitimate. His power is not legitimate. Therefore, we can oppose him for every, Nazis. But if a senile old man that doesn't even campaign wins, supposedly gets 81 million votes, where 20 million of those are very, very contentious in terms of their legitimacy, then if you argue against that or question it or ask any questions, then again, you are Hitler because they are legitimate, you are not. Then again, you are Hitler because they are legitimate, you are not. And anything you do is not legitimate. Anything they do is legitimate. And this is the narrative that they push on us. So I want to talk about the legitimacy wars and if we see the legitimacy of how these legitimacy wars are conducted, because it's fundamental, I believe, to understanding what's going on today. So the first legitimacy wars that I saw were the married family, the man and the woman, the married family, the nuclear family, the husband, wife, and 2.5 children, that sort of thing. So we're going back to like the 1960s here, but this was argued, and you can see the beginnings of the early stages of the globalist project. I can never work out if this was actually a globalist project to begin with, or was a Soviet communist Marxist subversion project that the globalists took over because of the sheer convenience of that that infrastructure and that ideology was already there, and they could use that to burn away all the path ahead for the globalist project, because both the communist and the globalist project, both ideological, and their attempt to control and be the only ideology in town is the same for both of them. Different purposes, and there's going to be a rich elite controlling, a monopolistic elite controlling the globalist, where there'd have been a communist elite controlling but essentially there's not a vast amount of difference between them, particularly when you look at it along ideological power and control lines and the burning desire to delegitimize everything else. That's very much part of the Marxist gig. So just having a look at that, the first thing they wanted to attack was the nuclear family, and there were two. The main way they did that was say, well, the family is not legitimate as a method of social organization. This is because the family is a particularly difficult one to, the loyalties of the family, the loyalties of children to parents, loyalty of the partners in the relationship to each other, and this sort of thing, or to other relatives within the family group. So they said, well, this is probably one of the biggest obstacles to power. The Marxists believe it, as indeed do the globalists. So subverting the family unit was it. So they're saying, well, the family unit, that social organization, is not legitimate, and they would come up with all these nonsense theories about how native tribes in Africa, where there were these black Amazon women who were in charge, all sorts of things like that. They came at nonsense upon nonsense there, but they were successful. Now the divorce courts were the very much the linchpin of this. So there's a vast amount of propaganda was being pumped out there. I didn't realize how much as a kid. I didn't see it, But well, before my time, a lot of this. Even a kid at school in like the 70s, late 70s, that sort of thing. Early 80s, I sort of didn't see the scale of it, and didn't appreciate. Looking back now, I see it was going on, but at the time I didn't. So there were the books by the Germaine Greer was well known. Germaine Greer was like a Catholic lady who used to really cry and boo-hoo into a coffee cup because she wasn't Jewish, because if she was also a radical feminist and Jewish, then she could truly appreciate the victimhood of women or something like that, some strange perverse thing there. I don't know, was that a form of self-flagellation? What was it exactly? Then you look at all the other, Betty Friedan, the Marxist right, all of these people attacking the family unit, particularly attacking men. Men were violent abusers, beating their wives every day, beating the children. The men were all pedophiles, inflicting pedophile acts on their daughters, and then there were the uncles that were pedophiling the daughter as well. So the daughter was effectively being, in every nuclear family, was being pack raped every day by every male member of the family. And the studies have shown, but they wouldn't tell you that's actually a lesbian gender studies academic who's paid to pump out this propaganda, who's also a Marxist. So they wouldn't. So that was the first attack on the family. So now, and following on out of that is that men's wealth, the wealth that men had, owning houses or having well-paying jobs or anything like that, that wasn't legitimate. And this was the crux of this, that the nuclear family, the heterosexual family, that was not legitimate because of all the bad things that the men beating wives, pedophiling daughters, the whole all manufactured, invented. Now, could you find a single instance of a perverted guy's pedophile? Sure you could. I mean, among populations of hundreds of millions, sure you could find an example of that. But they would then exaggerate those, saying, well, instead of that one instance being incredibly rare, they would say, well, let's exaggerate it by 50 or 100 times and just say that it's everywhere. Every man who has a daughter is a pedophile. Every man. I mean, that's it. That's how bad the family unit is. And this delegitimized the family unit in the eyes of a lot of people. But also wealth. Well, men have become rich by exploiting women because women are in the home looking after, say, the children or the household. And that means that they're engaging in unpaid work. They're not being paid to do that. And because they're not drawing a salary, I mean, we'll forget about all the other stuff, the food, the roof over the head or whatever, because they're not drawing a salary, that means they're exploited labor, which means that all the wealth in the family unit and all the wealth a man has because someone else is doing all the support work for him, that none of that wealth is it. So men's wealth is not legitimate. It's not legitimate. This is white men's wealth, particularly that they're going after. So what the divorce court should do is take a minimum of 50% plus 15% for each child. And so that's because the man's wealth isn't legitimate in the first place. So we can take however much we want. We're allowed to take as much as we want, ideologically, take as much as we want of his money because it was never legitimate in the first place. And on top of that, he's a Nazi pedophile, for fuck's sake. So that was the first line of attack. The second line that they've made, sort of the globalists have made a good run on, and we're still seeing this around today, as indeed we are the divorce stuff, but is that the wealth of white nations is not legitimate. Why are white nations wealthy? Why is the United States or Britain or France or Germany, whatever, wealthy? It's because they all exploited the black, but they stole all the black and brown people's money. That's why they're wealthy. Why are the brown and black nations poor and the white nations rich? Why? What? It's because white people stole it all. So their wealth is not legitimate. The wealth of white nations is not legitimate. Nothing about it is legitimate. It is all stolen as a result of exploitation. Illiterate black peasants in America, they built all America's wealth. All these white guys that invented all these labor-saving devices, all this advanced technology, steam trains, and data, all that sort of thing. No, that was irrelevant. That contributed nothing to the wealth of America. Those illiterate black peasants from Africa working in the cotton plantations, all the wealth, every penny of it was done by them. And the only reason white people have money because they exploited them, those fucking damn Nazis. So white wealth, or the wealth of white nations, is not legitimate. Colonialism. Yeah, are you Hitler? So this is and this is put about at the universities, the high schools, a lot of the literature today, certainly the editorials and a lot of the media focuses on this, and they're very much white wealth is not legitimate. Or the wealth of white nations not legitimate. Now it's moving into sort of like a subset of that is that the wealth of all white people is not legitimate. Going back to the wealth of white men is not legitimate in a family sense. Now they've simply recast that same argument to white wealth is not legitimate in a racial sense. So again, why are black people in America poor and white people on relative balance rich or richer? Then that's because A is exploiting B. Again, very Marxist type concept and argument of class struggle there, just retransposed into a race struggle. So white wealth. So if we take money from white people to give to black people, the compensations, slavery, all that sort of stuff, we're doing that, then we're only doing something good because the white people's wealth was never legitimate to begin with. It's never legitimate. It was stolen money, stolen by fucking Hitler. So this is the not simply the arguments, but the imagery, the very emotional imagery about this, ginning up black people to believe, hey, guess what? You're going to get millions, and you don't have to do a thing to get it. All you can do is scream victimhood. And so this is creating the race and the class, the gender division, and then the sexuality thing, saying, well, straight people's wealth isn't legitimate. And why are trans people not as rich as why is the proverbial black lesbian or the trans person not as rich as a hardworking, diligent, industrious, behave themselves straight person? It's again because the wealth isn't legitimate. You're only straight guy. You're only rich because you stole it off the black trans lesbian person. So your wealth's not legitimate, and you have to give that. So this is something, and this has reached a point now where we're going to say that if you're a white person with maybe an unused bedroom, there's two of you in the household, or three of you, and you've got a fourth bedroom or something like that, and that'll be determined by some sort of AI. Then that bedroom, if you don't put a black, lesbian, transgender person in there, then we'll fine you for being sufficiently racially inclusive, which means you have to pay an extra tax. You damn white fascist Nazi. So we can see where this is going, and but it's if you're looking at imposing ideological sort of imposing an ideology, which is what globalization is, you can't afford or tolerate or put up with any opposition of any sort, and you have to crush it. And the most likely source of that opposition is the straight white males, particularly, and straight white people. A small handful of non-white people, but the majority of them in the West, at least, the majority of them are going to be the straight. So if you can structure and concoct the ideology and the punishments for non-conformity, if you can structure them in such a way, again, attacking the family, attacking white nations, colonial evil, Hitlers, and then attacking white people for having wealth and others do not. You simply have to find any group, call those group an aggrieved group, and then say, well, white people are the cause of it, and it's monstrous in its falsehood, but that's in simple terms how they're doing it. But it's the purpose of it isn't to create equity or anything like that. The purpose is to eradicate and crush white people. And one of the ways of doing that, of course, to take all their wealth, take away their employment, affirmative action, and so on, take away their wealth, various fines, destroy the family, divorce courts, and so on, and also create alternative families like the lesbian family or the trans family. These sort of things are aggressively promoted by the globalist-controlled elites as a way, again, of eradicating and undermining social stability and social cohesion. So I could call these the legitimacy wars, and they're raging out there. I would say the globalists are winning it right now. They control nearly all the media and so on, and you see why they're aggressively wanting to shut down alternative views on social media and any questioning or alternative positions on these matters from other quarters, and it's essential they control that media. And I'd say they're winning at the moment, but it's not a slam dunk. There's, as we saw recently with the pushback against the insane Snow White and Little Mermaid stuff. Disney's very aggressive attempts at social engineering have been unsuccessful or partially successful, I guess. They've lost a lot of money there, but notice no matter how much money Disney loses, they're undeterred. For every $100 million they lose on one movie, they come straight out with another one. Their solution to all this is to say, well, the reason it hasn't been working so far, putting all the woke stuff in and trashing Western icons, the reason it hasn't worked so far is because of all the Nazis, because Hitler. And so they just double down and come out with another one that loses money, then another, and so on. So obviously money making is not their business. And I think in background, the government, the globalist controlled governments, are giving them secret write-downs and write-offs and other incentives to keep on doing this. Because they would see Disney and its propaganda machine or its capacity to deliver propaganda. It's got the perfect propaganda delivery system, the movie making and so on, and its iconic past of very popular classics such as the original Snow White and others. Then they would see this as, well, we have to have Disney putting this propaganda out. And okay, they're losing money hand of this, but they're doing our bidding. They're doing what we tell them to do, so we have to look after them in other ways. And I clearly think that's going on. I mean, look at all the media channels that pump out incessant, non-stop globalist, anti-Trump, anti-white people propaganda. None of them are making money. None of them make money. None of them could survive in a market economy. None of us ever imagined a situation where a media outlet would be propped up by another globalist company simply for the purposes of putting out a particular propaganda. Well, we never imagined this. We thought if it loses money, then it either has to, a media outlet, it either has to do things that the people want to hear and listen to and see, or it goes out of business. But we never imagined one that really would go out of business 100 times over, given its finances. But it's being propped up purely and kept alive and kept in the front line purely for propaganda, ideological propaganda purposes. No one ever conceived that would happen. And this is also a part of the wider legitimacy war. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.